Hi everyone, this is the notes for lesson 2.3, using a calculator. I'm sure you guys will be stoked about this. Okay, so first before we start, we need to make sure that our calculator is in the right mode and has to be set in degree mode. Most calculators at the top or the bottom of the screen, you can see a D or a DEG. Mine's right there. I don't know if you can see that small, but that would be one way to tell that you're in the right mode. You can go to setup and then just figure out how your calculator works, of course, but change it to make sure. Another way that I wrote on here is to check is if you type in the sign of 90, it should always come out to be 1. So if it doesn't, that probably means you're in radians. So just check and make sure your calculator is always in the right mode before you start. So when we're working with our calculator, most calculators don't have buttons for cosecant, secant, and cotangent, so we have to change them to sine, cosine, and tangent before we start. And another thing to remember is that we only use inverses when we're solving for angles, so that would be over here. Okay, so let's get started. So there's two different types of calculators. There's a calculator that would type it in like this, and this one's a regular calculator, a non-backwards calculator. So for this one, when we hit sine, it writes the word on the screen. So that means we do the sine first, and then we do the angle. So that means that the sine of 49 is 0.7547. So make sure you're rounding right when you do these. If I say 4 decimal places, you check the digit behind it and see what it does to the fourth one. So in a backwards calculator, if I hit the sine button, oops, I hit cosine. If I hit sine first, it's taking the sign of the number that was there, which was 0. Okay, so sine of 0 is 0. That's why it didn't change. So that means we need to type in our angle first, and then we would hit sine. So in backwards calculators, it's angle first, and then the trig function. Very good. So let's try example number 2. This one is secant, and we don't have a secant button, so that means we would need to change it to cosine. And we know that the reciprocal function, so if we flip this over and put it in the denominator, it will turn to cosine. So we'd have cosine of 97.977. So in a regular calculator, we would type that exactly as it says, cosine of 97.977. So our answer is negative 7.2059. So in a backward calculator, you would type that in as 1 divided by 97.977 cosine, and then you would hit equals at the end. Very good. So for number 3, it gives us 1 over the cotangent. So we can't type that in the way it is, so we need to change it to its reciprocal function. So since cotangent's in the bottom, that means if we move it to the top, it'll turn into tangent. So this is equal to the tangent of 51.4283. So we can type that in our calculator exactly like it says here, or backwards calculator, angle first. So that would give us 1.2539. Okay, so why don't you guys try questions 4 and 5, and when you come back, we'll go over the answers. So pause your videos, please. Okay, welcome back. So for number 4, I got 0.9135. And then for number 5, we have to change it to sine, so we flip it over. So 1 divided by sine of 35, and we got 1.7076. So make sure you write down any questions if you didn't get those answers, or try plugging it in your calculator again. Okay, so let's move on over to the other side, and this is finding angles. So you see how this time we're looking for our thetas. So it's kind of like solving an equation. Well, I guess it really is like solving an equation, but don't be scared. So we want to find an angle that's between 0 and 90. You guys did this back in geometry, but I don't know if you'll remember. So remember to get rid of the sine, we do the sine inverse. So that would mean that theta is equal to the sine inverse of 0.9677. So it's just like if something was being divided, the inverse is multiplication. Here we're taking the sine, so we do the sine inverse, that's sine -1, of both sides, which cancels those out. So that's how the sine moves to the other side, and it's its inverse function. So to type that in your calculator, for non-backwards, you just hit second or shift sign, and then type in that decimal that you have. So I get that our theta is equal to 75.3979. In a backwards calculator, type in the decimal part first, and then second sign. Very good. Okay, so for number 2, we're stuck with secant again, and we can't type that in our calculator. So that means we need to reciprocal it. But since we have an equation, what we do to one side, we have to do to both. So if I do 1 over the secant on that side, I have to do it to my other side. So 1 over secant is equal to cosine. And on the other side, we have a fraction now. Okay, and we did that to get rid of the secant to change it to cosine. So from here, we do the inverse like what we did at the top for number 1. So that means that theta would equal the cosine inverse of 1 over 1.0545. So when we type it in, we have to remember to hit that 1 over part. So cosine inverse of 1 divided by 1.0545. Make sure you end the parentheses so that way it gets the division inside that you're taking the cosine of the whole division part. So for that one, we would get that our theta is equal to 18.5012 degrees. Okay, so go ahead and try the other 3, please. Remember, if it's a reciprocal function, you have to flip it over, and you flip both sides, just like we did for number 2. So pause your video, and when we come back, we'll talk about the answers. Okay, welcome back. So for number 3, I got 34.6552. Number 4 is 22.8979. And number 5 is 68.6731. So if you have any questions on any of those, make sure you write them down, and we'll talk about them next class. We'll also talk about how to cut these out and put them in your notes. So Werner out.